How is everybody? Oops, I spoiled it all. I hope everybody's doing well, having a great day, great night. Um, I have not made a Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire video, so I wanted to do one on probably my favorite house in Game of Thrones. Probably top five house. And sorry about my mic. I'm talking into my computer mic, which is probably terrible. Um, but yeah, so House Tully is one of those houses I think in Westeros that doesn't get enough attention. I think they have been getting a little bit more attention in the House of Dragon, which I really like. House of the Dragon. But I think they should get more. I think their colors are sick. Their castle's sick. I think, um, you know, the River Lords are. I think that's sick. But yeah, when people talk about great houses, they bring up Lannisters, Targaryens, or the Baratheons. The Starks, the Tyrells. When they should actually be bringing up. Come on, they should be bringing up. They should be bringing up the High Towers. Come on, let's get that. Let's get that. Let's get that first and foremost. But House Tully is actually one of the most important families in the political history of Westeros. They're the lords of Riverrun, the Lord Paramount of the Trident, and the man ruling house of the Riverlands after Aegon's original conquest. Um, but what makes House Tully interesting to me is that they're not just always kings. They were not the strongest house in their region, and they were not always the richest or most feared. Their rise came from loyalty, alliances, and knowing how to, choose the winning side. And their words are family, duty, and honor. And throughout history, those words are tested over and over again. From Aegon's conquest to the Dance of the Dragons to Robert's Rebellion to the War of the Five Kings and the Red Wedding, House Tully is always close to the center of history. So yeah, I just want to go through the history, a little bit of the history of House Tully. I don't think I can hit everything. I'm sure that everyone can add more, and I'm sure that there's a bunch of people that have made videos already like this. But I wanted to just put my own out there. Um, Sorry, I'm saying that word a lot. Riverrun is their power, and to understand House Tully, you have to start with Riverrun. Riverrun is not just a castle; it's the heart of House Tully's power and identity. The castle sits where the Red Fork and the Tumblestone meet, and that location matters quite a bit throughout the story of all of A Song of Ice and Fire. The Riverlands are one of the most fought over regions in Westeros because they're right in the middle of everything. Armies are constantly marching through them, and kings are constantly trying to control them. And when war breaks out, the Riverland always suffers first. And it is an area, repeatedly where they go back and there's wars and battles at. So Riverrun's location gives House Tully influence, but also puts them in danger. It's a strong defensive castle because of the rivers around it, and that makes it hard to take by force, but it also means the Tullys are always responsible for defending a region that is difficult to hold together. Um, and that's one of their biggest things about House Tully. Their power is not simple. They rule a region full of proud houses like the Blackwoods, Brackens, Freys, Mallisters, and Vances. And these houses are all their own rivalries. They all have their own rivalries, especially the Brackens and the Blackwoods. Their own armies and all of them with their own kind of thoughts of power and ambition. So being Lord of Riverrun is not just about owning a castle; it's about constantly keeping the Riverlands from falling apart. And that's their castle back there, so I can get a better picture. The trout and the words. House Tully's sigil is a silver trout on blue and mud red, and I think it's beautiful. Family, duty, honor, I think, is some of the clearest, words and most simple that you can take away from a house, and I don't think it's as threatening as I would say fire and blood or we do not sow or hear me roar. Um, but they're kind of like a code of honor in a way. Family comes first. Duty matters a lot for these soldiers. Those soldiers are men, they're family, and honor should always guide your choices because you should always want to be honorable and you should always want to take the higher road. And I think that House Tully is, some of the only one of the only houses in Westeros that genuinely has good people. Um, Maybe not when they're dead, like this lady on the screen right here, the goat, um, Catelyn. But yeah, sometimes family and duty pull in different directions. Sometimes honor puts you in danger, and sometimes doing the right thing for your family can create disaster for the realm. And we see this time and again, even though they want to. Catelyn acts for family when she captures Tyrion. Edmure acts duty when he protects his people, and Hoster uses marriage alliances because he thinks it is his duty to strengthen his house. The blackfish follows honor even when it costs him. So when I look at House Tully's words, I do not see them just as a motto. I see the main conflict of the house. I see them as a main conflict of the house. They're always trying to live by those words, but Westeros will keep punishing them for it. So before the Targaryens came to Westeros, House Tully was already an old noble family in the Riverlands. They have ancient roots, but the important thing is they were not kings. That makes them different from houses like Stark, Lannister, you know, old houses like House Gardner, House Aaron. Those houses ruled kingdoms before Aegon's conquest. The Tullys did not. Instead, they served other river kings and powers that controlled the Riverlands over time. They were not born as kings, they were vassals who learned how to survive under stronger rulers, and they had to understand politics, alliances, and timing. The Riverlands were constantly changing hands. Different kings, different houses, and different outside powers all tried to control the region. And this kind of creates, you know, a history that they're able to be adaptable and they can adapt towards anything. So when Aegon the Conqueror arrives, House Tully is a perfect position to make a major, decision. And once they choose Aegon, their entire future changes, just like a lot of lords. Aegon's conquest, House Tully, you know, real rise begins during Aegon's conquest. At that time, the Riverlands were ruled by Harrenhal, also known as Harren the Black. He was an Ironborn king who ruled from Harrenhal, and his control over the Riverlands was hated by many of the River Lords. So when Aegon comes to Westeros with his sisters and dragons, the River Lord has a chance to break free from the Ironborn rule. Edmund Tully decides to support Aegon, and that decision changes quite literally their whole future. The Tullys did not defeat Harren alone, but they did choose the side that would win, and Aegon burned Harrenhal with Balerion the Black Dread. Harren and his sons died, and Ironborn rule over the Riverlands came to an end. And I'll probably say that story a lot throughout a lot of these videos because Harrenhal has a lot to do with the history of Westeros, which I love. And so they went from being one powerful house among many, just like amongst their peers, to then being rewarded a bunch of land. And yeah, they were smart enough to understand when history was changing, and when they kind of had to flip their cards. So Lord Paramount of the Trident. After Aegon's victory, House Tully was raised up as Lord Paramount of the Trident. That sounds like a huge reward, and it was, but also came with a lot of problems. The Tullys were now supposed to rule over the Riverlands, but they were not necessarily the most powerful or respected house in the region. This is different from the Starks in the north or the Lannisters in the Westerlands. The Starks had ruled the north for thousands of years. The Lannisters had ruled from Castle Lock for generations. Their authority felt very ancient, but the Tullys were elevated by Aegon. That means their power was real, but it depended heavily on the Iron Throne and on the ability to manage the other river lords. And the Riverlands are not an easy region to manage. The Freys are terrible. So I'm not even... Shut, man. The Blackwoods and Brackens hate each other. The Malisers are, like really douchebaggy and pride, basically just Slytherins. And Harrenhal is constantly changing hands. So yeah, House Tully reward is also a burden for them in a way because they have to just deal with like shitheads all the time. But yeah, so their service to the crown after Aegon's conquest, the Tullys became one of the most important houses of the New Realm. They served the Iron Throne, and for a long time they were generally loyal to Targaryens. Edmund Tully He even served as the hand of the king under Aegon the Conqueror, which shows how much trust the new dynasty had in him. That's a major position. The hand is basically the second most powerful person in the kingdom, like the VP. So for a Tully to hold that role early in Targaryen rule says a lot about how far the house had risen. Um, House Tully needed the Iron Throne because their rule over the Riverlands was tied to Aegon's new order. The crown gave them authority over river lords. And when the realm is united, House Tully can serve the crown and hold the Riverlands together. So that's a big pattern in their history is that when they're good, they're good. Um, but when the throne becomes unstable, the Tullys are always put in a hard situation. So the Dance of Dragons, is one of the best examples of how complicated Riverland politics can be. During the Targaryen civil war between Rhaenyra and Aegon II, House Tully was not immediately simple or united. Grover Tully favored the Greens, who supported Aegon II, but his descendants Elmo and later Kermit Tully supported Rhaenyra's blacks. That sounds almost funny because the Tully names are at Grover, Elmo, Kermit, and Oscar. Shout out George. But their role in the war was really super important. But Kermit totally becomes one of the youngest lords known, and these young lords they help continue the war after many older leaders were dead or exhausted. To me, this shows how important House Tully is. They're always just ready to step up. And when dragon lords were destroying each other, the Riverlands were kept together and were bloody, but still mattered. The Tullys were not, OP by any chance, but you know, them being smart helped them when they were caught in like many wars. So yeah, a lot later in history, Hoster Tully becomes one of the most important political players in the lead up to Robert's Rebellion. He understood that House Tully needed strong alliances. The Riverlands, are exposed. They don't have the comfort as the Vale being, it's definitely not comfortable up there, but um, they're closed off from everybody, and they don't have the cold protection of being so far up north, and they don't have the wealth of the Lannisters. So Hoster used marriage politics to strengthen River Run, and that like super helped. Like doing that helped. Doing that helped. Them them having to remarry. Sorry, I'm losing my mind. But his daughter Catelyn was originally betrothed to Brandon Stark, connecting House Tully to Winterfell. His other daughter, Lysa, would eventually be married to Jon Arryn, connecting House Tully to the Vale. Those alliances became really important because when the Mad King killed Brandon and Rickard Stark, and when Robert's Rebellion began, those families' connections helped bring the rebels together. This is where House Tully's words really matter. Family becomes politics, and Catelyn's marriage connects Riverrun to the Starks. Lysa's marriage connects Riverrun to the Aarons, and those marriages help the Tullys become part of an alliance that brings down the Targaryen dynasty. Hoster was not just marrying off his daughters randomly, he was building a network, and that changed the history of Westeros. And then during Robert's Rebellion, House Tully chooses rebellion against the Iron Throne, obviously. Their position as Lord Paramount of the Trident came from Aegon the Conqueror, and their authority in the Riverlands was tied to the Targaryen system. But by the time of Aerys II, the Mad King, the throne had become like fucked up. After Brandon Stark and Rickard Stark are killed, the rebellion grows. Jon Arryn, Robert Baratheon, and Ned Stark become central leaders of the rebel cause. Hoster Tully joins them, but the family alliances are part of the deal. Catelyn marries Ned Stark after Brandon's death, and Lysa marries Jon Arryn. Those marriages bind the Riverlands together, the North and the Vale. And by choosing rebellion, House Tully helps end nearly 300 years of Targaryen rule in Westeros. And once again, they survive by choosing the side that reshapes history. The War of the Five Kings is where House Tully's story becomes tragic, and pretty messed up. The war begins to escalate after Catelyn Stark, who is Catelyn Tully by birth, captures Tyrion Lannister. Catelyn is acting for family. She believes Tyrion was involved in the attack on Bran, and she thinks she is protecting her son. But that decision brings Tywin Lannister's wrath down on the Riverlands. The Mountain and other Lannister forces begin raiding and burning the Riverlands. And, you know, family pulls Catelyn into action, and honor makes the Tully stand against the Lannisters. But none of that protects them from, the reality of the war. They're not evil at all. I think they're great people. I think it's one of the best houses in Westeros. And they're also not like super ambitious of power. They don't want to rule the entire realm or dominate the realm. Um, but they're paying the price for everyone else fighting around them essentially. But Edmure Tully, the GOAT, I think he's one of the best characters in Westeros. I think he's one of the best characters in A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones in general, in the show, the book, whatever. I think he's really good in the show. But a lot of people treat him like he's foolish or weak. I think that's too simple. He's not perfect. He makes mistakes, and he actually cares about his people. And during the war, Edmure lets small folk into Riverrun for protection. From that may create problems, but the standpoint of our Lord's duty is to protect their people, and he wants to protect not just his soldiers but his people. Um, you know, while Robb is thinking about the whole entire war, Edmure is just thinking about the Riverlands and the people he's sworn to protect, which I think in ways maybe makes him more honorable than Robb. And Edmure might not have been perfect or been a perfect like general or anything or king or lord. But he does live up to the duty of his house, I believe. But House Tully's funeral is one of the strongest visual moments connected to House Tully through the show, which I really like. Even in death, they return to water, which is super super cool. I like how every family mostly every family has their own kind of funeral for those super cool houses, the super ancient houses. Um, you know, but by this point, the war is already tearing everything apart. Catelyn is grieving, Edmure is under pressure, and the Blackfish is frustrated. Robb's war is becoming more complicated, and in the middle of all that, they have to bury the man who led House Tully for so long. Rep. Um, and for a moment, House Tully is not just a political house or a military house, both in the book and the show. It's a family. And I know the scene where Edmure can't hit the bow, so the Blackfish just rips it from him, and I think in a way it shows both their personalities in that way. I think it's sweet, and I also think it's kind of really sad too. But the Red Wedding, um, this is a lot for them, and it is a low point in House Tully's history. Edmure marries Rosalind Frey as a part of the attempt to repair Robb Stark's broken marriage. Um, and instead of them solving everything with this political problem, it becomes a trap for them. The Freys, Boltons, and Lannisters betray the Starks and Tullys under Gressright. Robb Stark's murdered, Catelyn's murdered, many of the Stark and Tully men are slaughtered, Edmure is captured, and it is not just, you know, a destruction of trust. But guess right, and it's like from Odysseus, like Zeus's law, or the Odyssey from Zeus's law. Like, you do some stuff like that, bro. You're cooked. Like that's why Catelyn turns so crazy, and that's why she does everything she does because she's like, dog, like you guys slimed out my family. Um, but yeah, I mean, I they're Blackfish refused to surrender River Run easily. And he became the last major Tully figure to resist the Frey Lannister order completely. And his stand shows the stubborn honor of the house even after political defeat. And this is why they still matter. Tullys helped shape the alliances that changed Westeros. Their families tie and help connect the Riverlands to the Starks, the Arryns, and the wider war. And I think that House Tully will always be that dog house, like especially in future, in in the Winds of Winter. I think Tully's will still have a part to play. I think Edmure will have a part to play. And yeah, I appreciate you guys if you sat down, listened to this, or whatever. But thank you so much, and I appreciate it again. Have a good one. Family, duty, honor.